My name is Elsinore Mae. I was 26 when I walked back through the gates. I swore I'd never pass again. The house hadn't changed. Same white columns, same gravel drive that crunched like judgment under my shoes. What had changed was me, and the letter in my coat pocket, folded so many times the creases had gone soft as fabric. Asterisk, we need a private caregiver for Julian. Someone he trusts. Someone family, asterisk. My half-brother. Julian Voss. The name people said with a certain reverence now. After the company, after the headlines, after the accident that left him needing more help than his money could hire strangers to give with any real gentleness. I hadn't spoken to my family in 4 years. Not since the dinner where my stepmother told the table, in that light, amused voice she used for cruelty, that I was the practical one, meaning the unremarkable one, the one who wouldn't embarrass anyone by wanting more. I told myself I was coming back for Julian. That part was true. But some smaller, more honest part of me knew I was also coming back to see if 4 years had changed how they looked at me. It hadn't. I arrived at 9 in the morning, suitcase in hand, to find the family already gathered in the foyer. Not to welcome me, I understood within seconds, but to witness me. My stepmother's smile. My stepbrother Callum's smirk. Phone raised before I'd even set my bag down. "The help's here," he said, loud enough for the room, loud enough for whoever was watching his little video later. "Careful, Elsie. Don't trip over the marble. I know where you're used to walking is a lot less shiny." Laughter. Not from Julian. He wasn't in the room yet, but from everyone else, easy and practiced, like they'd rehearsed being unkind to me and found it fit well. I didn't answer. I picked my suitcase back up, and I walked past them toward the stairs, my spine straighter than it had been in years, because I already understood something they didn't. I wasn't here to be seen by them. I was here for the one person in that house who had never once laughed. Julian's room was the quietest place in a house full of noise. He was in the wheelchair by the window when I came in, and for a moment neither of us spoke. He'd been 11 the last time I saw him. All elbows and questions. He was 22 now, and there was a stillness in his face that hadn't been there before. The stillness of someone who has learned to expect less from people and be grateful for small honesty. "They told you not to come," he said finally. "Not a question." "They didn't tell me anything," I said. I read the letter myself. Something in his shoulders loosened, just slightly. "I wrote that letter," he admitted.
"Not Mom."
"Not Callum."
"Me."
"I asked for you specifically. I didn't think you'd actually come." I set my suitcase down by the door I'd been assigned, a converted linen closet, technically a room, if you were generous with the word. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who ever told me the truth," he said. "Everyone else tells me what I want to hear, because I sign their checks now. You used to tell me when my drawings were bad." I almost laughed. "They were bad." "They were terrible," he agreed, and for the first time, something like a smile. Over the following days, a rhythm formed between us that the rest of the house didn't seem to notice or care to acknowledge. I learned his mornings, the exercises the doctors wanted, the medications, the particular silence he needed after physical therapy before he could talk again. I learned, too, that he watched the family the way I did now, from a careful distance, cataloging. "They think I don't see it," he told me one evening, watching the courtyard where Callum stood laughing with our stepmother. "How they treat you. How they treated you before, when we were kids." "It's not your job to fix that," I said. "No," he agreed slowly. "But it might be my job to stop pretending I don't see it." I didn't understand yet what he meant. I would, eventually. But that evening, I only felt the small, unfamiliar warmth of being seen, really seen, for the first time in a very long time. Humiliation, I learned, rarely announces itself. It arrives in small increments, disguised as jokes, as concern, as manners. My stepmother began referring to me only as Julian's girl, in front of guests, never by name, as though naming me might imply I belonged to the family rather than serving it. Callum took to leaving his shoes outside my door. "Since you're already up," he'd say, all charm, no apology beneath it. I said nothing. I had promised myself, walking back through those gates, that I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me break. I had broken once, years ago, in this house, and I remembered exactly how it felt, how useless the tears had been, how they'd only fed the performance. So instead, I watched. I noticed things. I noticed that Callum's investments seemed to draw suspiciously large sums from accounts he didn't technically have access to, accounts that were, on paper, still jointly held with Julian's, a holdover from before the accident that no one had bothered updating. I noticed that my stepmother's warmth toward Julian arrived only in front of witnesses, like a coat put on for weather, then hung up the moment they left the room. I noticed most of all that Julian noticed too. "You're not saying anything," he observed one night, after Callum had made another joke at my expense over dinner, one about my community college manners, delivered with a wink meant to soften the blade even as it went in. "There's nothing to say yet," I told him. "Not until I understand what I'm looking at." He studied me for a long moment. "You sound like you're building a case." "Maybe I am," I admitted. "Not against them."
For you.
He didn't ask what I meant. But that night, for the first time, he asked me to bring him the folder of financial statements his lawyer had sent months ago. The one, he confessed quietly, he'd been too tired, too doubtful of himself, to ever really read. "Read them with me," he said. "I trust your eyes more than mine right now."
I did.
And what I found, in the careful, patient hours that followed, was the shape of a betrayal far larger than any dinner table joke. The truth, when it surfaced, did not arrive as a single dramatic document. It arrived slowly, the way water finds the low places in a floor you thought was level. Julian's accident had left a 6-month gap where decisions were made on his behalf, a temporary power of attorney, granted in trust, to our stepmother for administrative ease. In that gap, 3 transfers had moved from a dormant joint account into a shell entity registered to an address that, when I searched it quietly one evening, turned out to be Callum's college roommate's apartment. Small amounts individually, the kind of numbers that wouldn't trigger alarm on their own. But, together, over 6 months, they added up to something that could no longer be called an oversight. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't even tell Julian everything at first. I wanted to be certain, not righteous. I spent 2 weeks cross-referencing statements late at night, after his medications, after the house had gone quiet, my closet room lit by a single lamp and the soft blue glow of a laptop screen. When I finally laid it all out for him, dates, amounts, the paper trail, Julian was silent for a long time. "I gave her that power because I trusted her," he said finally. "Because she cried at my bedside every day for a month." "She may have meant that grief," I said carefully. "People can hold 2 things at once. Grief and greed aren't strangers to each other." He looked at me, something raw in his face. "What do I do?" "That's not my decision," I said. "It's yours. I can only make sure you're deciding with the truth in your hands instead of without it." He was quiet again, turning the folder over in his lap like it weighed more than paper should. "You could have used this," he said eventually, "against them. For yourself. You had every reason to." I thought about it, I admitted, because lying to him would have undone everything I'd built between us. But that's not the kind of person I want to be when this is over. I don't want to win by becoming them. Julian called the family together on a Sunday, in the same foyer where I'd first been mocked, in front of the same marble Callum had joked about. I stood at the back, not because I was told to, but because this needed to be Julian's voice, not mine. He didn't shout. He didn't perform. He simply set the folder on the entry table and said, quietly, "I know about the transfers." The silence that followed had a texture to it. I could feel Callum's practiced charm evaporate in real time, watch my stepmother's face rearrange itself through 3 or 4 expressions before settling on wounded innocence. "Julian, sweetheart, whatever you think you've found." "I have statements," he said.
Dates.
"Signatures."
I'm not asking you to explain them to me right now.
"I'm telling you I know, and I'm telling you what happens next." He did not demand apologies. He did not ask for public admission or punishment. He asked, simply, that the power of attorney be formally and permanently revoked, that the funds be returned on a schedule his lawyer would draw up, and that any further administrative ease over his affairs would require independent oversight, not family goodwill. "And Elsinore," he said, turning finally to me, will be staying as long as I need her, not as help. As my sister. If anyone in this house has a problem calling her that, the door works both ways. Callum opened his mouth, some old reflex toward mockery, and closed it again when he found nothing left to mock. My stepmother's eyes moved to me with something I didn't recognize at first, because I'd never seen it from her before. It was, unmistakably, fear. Not of exposure alone, but of irrelevance, of a son who had learned, finally, to see clearly. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The silence Julian had built was doing more work than any words of mine could have. The days after the confrontation were strange in their quiet. Callum left within the week, citing opportunities elsewhere that fooled no one. My stepmother remained, technically, but something had shifted permanently in the architecture of the house. She no longer commanded rooms the way she once had. She had become, in the family's new arithmetic, someone being watched rather than someone watching. I did not gloat. I found, to my own quiet surprise, that I didn't want to. There was no pleasure in her diminishment, only a kind of tired relief that the performance had finally ended. Julian and I fell into an easier rhythm after that, not because the hard work of his recovery had lessened, but because the house itself had stopped fighting us. I stayed in the closet room another month before Julian insisted, with an exasperation that made me laugh for the first time in years, that I take the guest suite down the hall instead. "You've been sleeping next to the water heater for 6 weeks," he said. "I let a lot of things slide in this house." Not that. Small kindness, offered plainly, without performance. I had forgotten how disarming that could be. One evening, sorting through old boxes in the room that used to be mine as a child, I found a drawing Julian had made at 8 years old, a stick-figure family, badly proportioned, one figure holding another figure's hand at the edge of the page, slightly apart from the rest. "That's you," he said when I showed him, embarrassed. "I always drew you a little apart. Not because you weren't part of it. Because you were the only one who felt real to me." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Some truths don't need an answer. They only need to be received. There were nights, in the quiet after everything settled, when I let myself imagine what it might have felt like to burn it all down, to expose Callum publicly, to humiliate my stepmother the way she'd humiliated me on the marble that first morning, word for word, laugh for laugh. I understood, sitting with that fantasy, why revenge is so often mistaken for justice. It offers a kind of symmetry that feels, in the moment, like fairness. But symmetry isn't healing. I had learned that the hard way, watching what 4 years of quiet resentment had done to me before I ever walked back through those gates, how it had hollowed out the parts of myself that used to trust easily, laugh easily, believe people meant well, until proven otherwise. I didn't want to hand that same hollowing to anyone else, even people who'd earned worse. So I chose the quieter thing. I chose to let the truth do the work cruelty couldn't. I chose to let Julian's voice, not mine, carry the weight of consequence, because some things land differently when they come from someone who has every reason to protect the people who hurt them and chooses honesty instead. My stepmother and I have not become close. I don't expect we ever will. But there was a moment, weeks later, when she found me in the kitchen and said, stiffly, without quite meeting my eyes, "Julian speaks very highly of you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't warmth. But it was the first true sentence she'd ever spoken to me, and I found I could accept it for exactly what it was, a small, imperfect beginning, offered by someone still learning how to be honest. I said, "Thank you," and meant it. Nothing more, nothing less. A year later, I still live in that house, though it doesn't feel like the house I first walked into anymore. Julian's recovery continues, slower some days than others, but steadier now, held up by people who tell him the truth instead of what he wants to hear. Callum reaches out occasionally, carefully worded messages that read like apologies, without quite committing to the word. I answer sometimes. Not out of obligation. Out of the same patience I've learned to extend to most things now, the understanding that people change on their own timelines if they change at all, and that isn't mine to control. Some evenings, Julian and I sit by the same window where I first found him, and he tells me about the company, the decisions ahead, the life he's slowly reclaiming piece by piece. He asks my opinion now, genuinely, the way he used to as a child before either of us learned what this family could cost a person's trust. I think often about that first morning, the marble floor, the laughter, the phone raised to capture my smallness for someone else's entertainment. I think about how easy it would have been to let that moment define what I became. Instead, I became the person who stayed, who watched carefully instead of reacting loudly, who chose truth over spectacle and quiet resolve over cruelty, even when cruelty would have been so much easier to reach for.
My name is Elsinore Mae.
I did not come home to punish anyone. I came home to remember who I was before they ever tried to convince me I was less, and I found her again, exactly where I'd left her, waiting patiently by a window in a room at the end of a very long hall.